am a Ronald Reagan conservative. I believe in limited government. I believe in low taxes. I believe in a strong national defense. And I believe that the private sector is the engine of growth of our economy. I believe that the family, and not the government, is the most important structure in our society. I know that our security and our freedom depend upon a world in which America, with our allies, leads. And above all else, I know that the most conservative of conservative values is fidelity to our Constitution. I tell you, I have never voted for a Democrat, but this year I am proudly casting my vote for Vice President Kamala Harris. But mostly we're not going back. Vice President Harris is standing in the breach at a critical moment in our nation's history. She's working to unite reasonable people from all across the political spectrum. Vice President Harris has dedicated her life to public service. I know that she loves our country, and I know that she will be a president for all Americans. As a conservative, as a patriot, as a mother, as someone who reveres our Constitution, I am honored to join her in this urgent cause. As we meet here today, our republic faces a threat unlike any we have faced before. A former president who attempted to stay in power by unraveling the foundations of our republic, by refusing to accept the lawful results confirmed by dozens of courts of the 2020 election. We cannot turn away from this truth. In this election, putting patriotism ahead of partisanship is not an aspiration, it is our duty. At the very heart of our survival as a republic is the peaceful transition of power. Ronald Reagan said this was nothing short of a miracle, that every 4 or 8 years, the most powerful office in our land, indeed the most powerful office in the world, is passed peacefully to a new president. In the United States of America, violence does not and must never determine who rules us. Voters do. And in this country, under our Constitution, our president has a particular solemn obligation to ensure and guarantee the peaceful transfer of power. Since the beginning of the Republic, every president in our history has fulfilled that duty. Every president until Donald Trump. When Donald Trump woke up on the morning of January 6, 2021, his intention, despite having lost the election, was that he would remain president. Rather than accept his loss and concede defeat, he had spent months overseeing a multi-part plan to attempt to seize power and remain in office. He ignored the rulings of the courts, He corruptly pressured state legislatures, including here in Wisconsin, to overturn the results of their elections. He told the Justice Department to lie for him. He conspired to have fake electoral votes cast, and he corruptly pressured his vice president to take illegal and unconstitutional actions. He summoned a mob to Washington, D.C. with his lies, and he sent the armed mob to the United States Capitol in an effort to stop the counting of electoral votes. As the violent mob attacked our Capitol, in Donald Trump's name, as they brutally beat law enforcement officers, as they hunted the Vice President and the Speaker of the House, Donald Trump watched the attack on television for hours, Sitting in the dining room next to the Oval Office, he refused repeated pleas from his family, from his closest advisors, from the most senior officials in his campaign and in our government to tell the mob to leave. And when Donald Trump finally did speak publicly after hours of violence, after the Capitol had been invaded, he praised the rioters. He did not condemn them. That's who Donald Trump is. Those facts that we know about what Donald Trump did, including what he did when our Capitol was under siege, those facts do not come from Donald Trump's political opponents. Those facts come from the people closest to him. They are the ones who testified that Donald Trump did not want to stop the violent attack on our Capitol. When he learned that Vice President Pence was not going to abandon his oath and help Trump seize power, Trump sent out a tweet attacking Pence and further inflaming the mob. One of Trump's aides testified that shortly after that, this aide received a phone call alerting him that the Vice President had been evacuated for his own safety from his office off the floor of the Senate. This aide recalled rushing to the dining room to tell Trump, hoping that this information would convince him to take immediate action to ensure the Vice President's safety. Instead, after this aide delivered that news, Donald Trump looked up at him and said, "So what?" He said, "So what?" It is Donald Trump's closest aides who also told us this. They said that while the attack on our Capitol was happening, Donald Trump was handed a note informing him that a civilian had been shot at the door to the chamber of the United States House of Representatives. Donald Trump put the note down on the table in front of him, continued to watch the attack on television, and still refused to tell the mob to leave the Capitol. Donald Trump was willing to sacrifice our Capitol to allow law enforcement officers to be beaten and brutalized in his name and to violate the law and the Constitution in order to seize power for himself. I don't care if you are a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. That is depravity, and we must never become numb to it. Any person who would do these things can never be trusted with power again. We must defeat Donald Trump on November 5th. In that election 20 years ago, when we were campaigning in Wisconsin and all across the country, we were campaigning as compassionate conservatives. What January 6th shows us is that there is not an ounce of compassion in Donald Trump. He is petty, he is vindictive, and he is cruel. And Donald Trump is not fit to lead this good and great nation. Now, sometimes people will say, you know, January 6th wasn't that big a deal. You know, in a time when I have heard many pretty stunning things from Republicans, one of the most stunning was yesterday from your former governor, Scott Walker, who said basically, people are over January 6th. When you think about what that means, that an elected official, a former elected official, is so willing to minimize what happened, to say things like I've heard from others, to say, don't worry, our institutions held that day. We have a responsibility, all of us, to remind people that our institutions don't defend themselves. We, the people, have to do that. We, the people, defend our institutions. And our institutions held on January 6th because there were brave men and women, including elected officials at every level of our government, who did their duty, who stood up for what was right, who resisted Donald Trump's efforts to pressure them to violate their oaths. And our institutions held especially because of the bravery of the men and women in law enforcement and in our military, in our Capitol Police, our Secret Service, the Metropolitan Police. They are the ones who defended our Capitol, our democracy, and our lives. Many of them fought a bloody, hours-long battle on the West Front of the Capitol. Go watch the video of that battle. It is sickening. They're the ones who held the line and prevented far worse from happening that day. They are the true profiles in courage. Do not let anyone lie about what happened and what they did. Our institutions also held because of Vice President Mike Pence, who refused to violate his oath to the Constitution. And that is why Mike Pence is not Donald Trump's running mate today. Instead, J.D. Vance is on the ticket. Vance has said, that's true. Vance has said repeatedly that he would have done what Donald Trump wanted, that he would have rejected electoral votes. He would have thrown out the votes of the people of Wisconsin because he didn't like the way that you voted. That is tyranny, and that is disqualifying. History teaches us again and again that democracies can fall. They fall to populists. They fall to strongmen who beguile their fellow citizens with conspiracy theories and false emergencies. As my friend, the late Charles Krauthammer, taught us, the lesson of our history is that the task of merely maintaining strong and sturdy the structures of our constitutional order is unending. It is the continuing and ceaseless work of every generation. And that responsibility now falls on all of us in this election. This great country of ours requires leaders of character. We must choose men and women who have what Abraham Lincoln called a sincere heart. Our nation's second president, John Adams, put it this way. On the first night he ever spent in the White House, he wrote a letter to his wife, Abigail. And his letter included a prayer that is so special, President Kennedy had it engraved in the mantelpiece in the state dining room in the White House. And in his letter, he said this, "May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof. Now, I'm confident, just a second, I am confident that John Adams meant women too. In this election, a broad coalition has come together to support Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, we may disagree on some things, but we are bound together by the one thing that matters to us as Americans more than any other, and that's our duty to our Constitution and our belief in the miracle and the blessing of this incredible nation. We have a shared commitment as Americans to ensuring that future generations live in a nation where power is transferred peacefully, where our leaders are men and women of good faith, and where our public servants set aside partisan battles to do what's right for this country. So today I ask all of you here and everyone listening across this great country to join us. I ask you to meet this moment. I ask you to stand in truth, to reject the depraved cruelty of Donald Trump. And I ask you instead to help us elect Kamala Harris for president. I know that President Harris will be able to unite this nation. I know that she will be a president who will defend the rule of law. And I know that she will be a president who can inspire all of our children, and if I might say so, especially our little girls. To do great things.
Aisha, look, this is an important moment. You had Liz Cheney with this introduction, formally with her endorsement of Harris, appearing together at a county that was the birthplace of the Republican Party, setting up the vice president to give a 20-minute address for the nation to hear. How impactful is what we just heard from Cheney with that full-throated endorsement, reaching out to Republicans, to moderates?
Listen, Erin, when she categorized Donald Trump as being someone who has depraved cruelty, that's the language that she used, depraved cruelty, I got chills. I think it's very impactful to hear her who, let's be clear, she is not a progressive Republican by any stretch of the imagination. This is someone who probably fundamentally disagrees with the Biden agenda and certainly with many of the things that Harris is proposing that she would do when she becomes president. But at the core of it is really this question that we have right now before us about what America we want to be. Are we going to be an America that lifts up people who are cruel and who do harm and who do not reflect the character that we deserve to be led by? Or are we going to come together despite our differences to put someone in place who's actually going to carry on the American ideal and preserve our democracy?
Okay.
So I think that was powerful.
And Mark, that's the argument, of course, that Liz Cheney's making, that Harris is making, that this is about democracy. In fact, Liz Cheney said, Mark, just a moment ago, that she has never voted for a Democrat before. Just to make it clear, that would mean she didn't vote for Joe Biden. But she will vote for Harris. So, Mark, my question to you is, we all knew where Liz Cheney stood before this, but now we saw her stand there with Harris, and that is perhaps a distinction that makes a difference. Are you concerned that Liz Cheney gives any anti-Trump Republican voters the permission and perhaps the inspiration to vote for Harris?
No, because I think if they're still anti-Trump at this point, they've already made up their mind. Look, I think if you're still undecided, if you're in that 3 to 4%, whatever the number is, it's probably because you're waiting for Kamala Harris to answer the question on your mind, the number one issue on your mind. And if it's like most Americans, it's how are you going to lower gas and grocery prices? How are you going to seal the border? How are you going to deal with the war that's raging in the Middle East? And she can't answer any of those questions. She hasn't. And that's why you're probably still undecided. And at the heart of the matter, things were more affordable, border was more secure, world was safer when we had Donald Trump. Liz Cheney can't change that.
Well, I mean, Mark, though, but I'm wondering, what about the people who say they can't stand Trump's character? They're not sure if they can go that way, right? But they don't like Harris's policies, and they don't want to go that way either. People who perhaps, don't feel about democracy the way that Liz Cheney does, but maybe they feel about policy the way Liz Cheney does. Does this open that door?
Well, I don't think so, because at the end of the day, the policies of Kamala Harris are more of the same failures from Joe Biden. She wants to turn the page. She wrote the book along with Joe Biden. So you're not going to get any different policies. So voting for someone who is opposed to everything you stand for is going to actually make things continue to be more expensive. Border's still going to be unsecure. That's not going to change things. And I think that's why that small slice of people are still undecided.
All right, so Philip, in a moment, I'm going to get some sound here of how Harris reacted in her 20-minute speech. But I do just want to play one other thing that Liz Cheney said, and this is about January 6th, which, right, she has made the entire core of why she is going to vote for Harris, right? She says democracy is on the line. So specifically, she talks about what we just learned last night in that new filing from the special counsel, which is that Trump told his aide, so what, when he heard that his vice president, Mike Pence's life was in danger. Liz Cheney just spoke about that.
I don't care if you are a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. That is depravity, and we must never become numb to it. Any person who would do these things can never be trusted with power again. We must defeat Donald Trump on November 5th.
Philip, are there any people that haven't long ago made up their mind for whom that January 6th democracy argument will now resonate?
Probably not. I mean, this is something that, the Smith filing was very interesting and contained new details, but all of us knew from the House Select Committee's work, led by Liz Cheney, what exactly happened over the course of the months after the 2020 election. Honestly, we all watched it unfold in real time. We saw what happened in the weeks after the election and on January 6th. We have polling that consistently shows that Republicans in particular and Trump supporters have not had their minds changed in the same way that their minds never changed on things like the Russia investigation or the first impeachment of Donald Trump. They have stuck by Donald Trump and are not wavering. But this is an election in which we're going to be looking at 7 states, probably 6 or 7 states, that have very, very close margins. And so I think the intent of this is not to try and peel away hardcore Trump voters. That's not why Liz Cheney is standing with Kamala Harris. It is instead to either have people who are sort of indifferent to Donald Trump, don't love him, don't love Harris, give them either permission to potentially cast a vote for Harris or just stay home and feel I can't go out and vote for that person, which is almost as good as a vote for Kamala Harris.
So Harris also took on this issue. I mean, it's core to Liz Cheney. They're appearing together. So that's part of what this platform in this moment was about in that speech. But she did also talk about Trump and January 6th in a very direct way. Here she is.
Therein lies the profound difference between Donald Trump and me. He, who violated the oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And make no mistake, he who, if given the chance, would violate it again. Anyone who has called for, I quote, termination of the Constitution of the United States, as Donald Trump has, must never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. Never again.
Aisha, there are some for whom that resonates, right? That is the choir, right? That is the preaching to the choir. That was a rally. But do you think at this point that that does, bring in new people or give permission? And how come?
Well, as I watch this, one of the things that jump out at me is not so much as what's being said, but what's being seen. In this image where you have Liz Cheney standing there right behind Kamala Harris. And what that looks like to me is two strong and powerful women who are done with the patriarchy, who are done with the cat lady memes, who are done with the meanness and the nastiness. And if anything, I am sitting there watching them united as women that are more than 50% of this population. Remember, 57% of women fired Donald Trump and rejected him in the 2020 election. So to have the two of them standing there, even though they're ideologically not necessarily the same, I think sends more of a powerful image than anything that either of them could say.